This is Tell Your Story Alaska. We talk aviation, history, theology, but most of all, the raw stories of Alaskans and the gospel. Hello, welcome back to Tell Your Story Alaska. Today I am sitting here with Dwayne King and Joe Gerwig. Now, my understanding is, Dwayne, you are the founder of Kingdom Air Corp near Sutton, Alaska, which is where we are right now.
Yes.
I just flew in here this morning with my mall. And Joe, you are the director of operations, which means you're in charge of like the flight school part of it.
Yep, and over kind of all of it, over the flying, over the maintenance, over the hospitality. All the different aspects.
Okay. So I contacted you, Joe, a while ago about telling the story of Kingdom Air Corp. And I know each of you have your own life stories as well, which I'd love to get sometime. And both of you each have flying stories and that sort of thing. But today I'd really love to get the story of Kingdom Air Corp, why it exists, where did it come from, and just the whole story behind it. So, Dwayne, since you're the founder, let's start with you. Take us back to briefly your story. How did you end up here in Alaska and what led up to Kingdom Air Corp? How about we start with that?
Yeah, and it really has this thread of direction of God through my life and the experience of it all. And like so many of us, we read the book Jungle Pilot, The End of the Spear, the story of the 5 missionaries. And that had a concrete effect on the foundation of my life of ministry. So everything in my life that is connected, it has remained connected because of that story and all of what was in it and what brought these men to seek out people in Ecuador, where they were, to find these people and bring them the message of the gospel. So because of the same kind of experience of salvation in my life at 12 years old, between 12 and 16, there were those years of looking for how I would play out or live out my life in regards to that work of salvation. It meant that it created in me a spirit of obedience and a desire to fulfill what God wanted in my life. And so I began that preparation, so to speak. And because of a godly family, because of the impact of scripture memory, and because of the work of the Holy Spirit and taking the words that I was memorizing and making me try to make it real and genuine in my life, that it wasn't just getting the bars of scripture memory verses or the awards or anything like that. No, it had to come down to a meaningful thing. So it went through this thread, went through my need of Bible training. I could see it was all about something from the Word of God that had to be true with my life. Genuine. Russian word, I love it. Nastoyashi. Genuine. And so, as best as you can, with the guidance of God's Word, faithful proclaiming of the gospel through great Bible churches, I went on to Bible school. Bible school afforded me an opportunity to be able to communicate. And so when you're up in front of people, you want to make sense. I don't always make sense in what I say. And I fail in that often, but you want to be genuine and you want to get something across that moves people along in the same thing that you've been moved along.
Mm.
And I found it was the Word of God.
Mm.
And so learning to preach it, teach it, communicate it, and disseminate this word to the nations
Mm.
was all in this process
Mm.
of getting ready to come and serve the Lord in Alaska. So
It sounds like a big part of your journey is making your dedication to God's word and your faith. You're using the word genuine a lot.
Yes.
Which could imply that there's a lot of ingenuineness, just kind of in religious culture, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And it became very important to you to make this genuine through and through,
Mm-hmm.
and make your life actions reflect that.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
right.
Mm.
So you want to do that. You do not want to live a life that's phony.
Right.
And so and it doesn't mean that everything in your life is truly genuine. You find that you still live in the effects of the flesh and all of that goes on. But by and large, you're working toward that understanding that God sees, hears, knows everything about you.
Mm.
So that truth is what you can do to look a unsaved person in the eye, or anybody in the eye, and say, to the best of my ability, I'm trying to be genuine and true and faithful.
Mm.
And I think God put you in my lap
Mm.
because I prayed this morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe above anyone, God is trying to use us to move people along from this point spiritually up. So that has been my...
Well, I really resonate with that because my wife and I have been talking a lot about that. What you're saying is reminding me of conversations with my wife lately. We talk about being present. And when you're present, you're not talking about like ministry strategy or a big philosophy of ministry. You're not talking about your big 20-year future plans. You are in the room, sitting next to someone, you're looking them in the eye, and you're present with them. You're not thinking about something else.
Right.
And from my little time I've spent with you, I can tell that that's very important to you. The most important thing is the person in front of you, the eye contact, the genuineness, and your genuine love for them, no matter who they are.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see that in you. So tell me about how that translated to you being in Alaska and moving towards Kingdom Air Corp and it becoming a thing.
Design of God, orchestration of God, and circumstances that God put in my life. I think it was an amazing thing that God gave me a wife, Carolyn, for 54 years. And God gave me this woman that helped me be genuine. There was no pulling a wool over Carolyn's eyes. So that produces honesty and humbleness and closeness. So God gave me this wonderful woman, Carolyn. And so then God gave me other people. J.C. Harder, for one. There were many people before J.C. Harder, but J.C. was the man that one of the first men that I met at Pinewood Alliance Church with Mr. R.G. Letourneau. He invited me to go to his church the day I arrived at Letourneau. And I didn't realize how I fell into that. He's the founder. He was the president and leading Letourneau University, Letourneau College. Anyway, in that church, that same week, in August of 1963, 2 weeks after I was married to Carolyn. God put us in this relationship with these people. J.C. Harder was a native Alaskan. And so he was born and raised in Palmer, Alaska. And he became a pilot and then a mechanic. And then he went off to the Army and Vietnam and came back and married a girl from Longview, Texas. So they were beginning their first weeks of settling down there after their marriage as well. And so that gave me this relationship with JC, an Alaskan native from an orphanage in Palmer. And so,
did you have any connection to Alaska before that?
I had no. Yes, I did. It was about that time that I had heard through some articles about Alaska Native villages. And I forget exactly the articles, but it was through that I was aware of the native work and the need to reach the villages by aircraft. This was 1963, after 3 years of Bible school at Practical Bible Training School. And that then led me to go to Laterno College, meeting J.C. Harder and him teaching me how to fly. Well, he was an Alaska bush pilot. And he was down in Texas, in the city, and a big airport. But we found lots of grass strips. And we found airplanes to fly because we worked on them. We built them together, PA-12 and a Super Cub. And JC and I were having a blast, like these guys out here, having a blast flying around and looking for new places to fly that we should not have been doing. And anyway, all of that created in me the spirit of being able to use an airplane to go to the village. And AC kept saying, Dwayne, Alaska. This is the way we do it in Alaska. And then he'd show actual videos to me, not videos, but movies.
Oh, yeah.
And of flying the gorge at Kinnick Glacier. We all know about that.
Yeah.
And so back in that day, that was in the 60s, the gorge was a little different. The ice was taller. And the river was much narrower, right between the ice and the rock. Oh, my land. Seeing these movies of that. So that just made me understand, if I could learn to fly an airplane and get to these places where the native people live. So that steered me along the way. And then I connected with Arctic Missions and Johnny Gillespie and Roald Amundsen at Mark. And it was just getting started. And the old pilots from Arctic Missions were getting too old to fly. Ken Hughes, his son Kenny, was coming up. And so these guys I got to know and meet, and I applied to the mission, and they said, go to Mark and get a year experience flying the passes. And 3 weeks after I arrived at Mark with 360 hours, they put me in a 180.
Wow.
I mean, I didn't even have a chance to jump from a 120 to a 170. But they put me in a 180.
Were you intimidated at the time?
I was very intimidated. But the first flight of my own, there was a generator in the back. And Roald Amundsen said, take that west, fly through Merrill Pass, and take it to Dave Penn's out in Stony River.
Wow.
And I got out there and landed in that generator and saw the thrill of that family. And I stayed there for a couple of days and then came back. Oh man. He took me to native homes, and right away it was figuring out I knew how to weld. I knew how to weld stick. Not an electric, but oxyacetylene on a boat with a big rip in it. I just said, I can weld that. Aluminum with a special rod, flux on it. And I welded up that boat. And that native guy turned it over, put it out into the Kuskokwim River, went on his way. And so I could see then the way to reach a lot of these native people was to associate with them, to fix something that was their real need. And then it went on with three-wheelers and all these snow machines that I could weld up and fix up.
Yeah.
So I carried a little oxyacetylene set with me at times that we had down at the Mark hangar.
So it was like the meeting those little needs, like fixing something that they need with your skill. It created a bond with individuals in the community. And it's very practical and very simple. Yes. So tell me about how you went from that first flight in the 180 to now you've got a whole fleet of Cessnas out here. What happened?
Well, it was finding value in tools to take the gospel. It was finding value in fixing old airplanes, wrecked airplanes in my backyard, no hangars, for years, up in Toke, in Bettles. And then it was soon to see that Dave Ketcher and Tam Ketcher had a great desire to get a Bible camp going. They had 2 years where they used their sourdough outfitters equipment, rafts and canoes and backpacks and stoves and all that. And they said, here, use this. Get a bunch of kids together from Ellicott and Anaktuvik. And so I was flying up to those places, helping Dave Ketcher get groceries up there, propane bottles, and things that they needed from his little store in Bettles. And he had me flying up there. At the same time, I was starting a church because I'd spent 10 years in Toke, found out that having an IA, authorized inspector mechanic license, a pilot instructor rating. So finding out that those two tools put me next to guys that were unsaved. Many of them with either emotional or marital or personal problems. That because I was helping them fix their airplane underneath the cowling of a Super Cub, or annualing it, which it had been annualed for years, helping them to get their rating because they hadn't had a pilot's license. There's, in those days, in the 80s, the Brooks Range was full of these guys.
Wow.
That were trappers, hunters, guides, miners, and they were all over the mountains. And I had a Piper Pacer that I could land anywhere. And on skis in the winter, I could fly and land and find them. Just on a clear day, up in those mountains, see something coming out of a smokestack on some river, some creek, back in some valley, and go and find out who's there in the middle of winter. And then find guys that were trying to hide from everybody, but sick and tired of that after several months. And they loved it when I would make an airdrop of a head of lettuce or cabbage or some carrots or some apples from Fairbanks that we had gotten all the way to Bettles. So then all these relationship building, more than I could have time to fly to.
And you saw the connection between the skill set, the tool, and the purpose.
Yes.
It's like the trifecta
Yeah.
that combined in you, and you saw something there.
Yeah.
And that's what drove you.
And guys were coming to the Lord. They needed discipling. They found out I was teaching the word on Sunday at the ComServac Community Service Facility at Bettles, right there at the Bettles Flight Service
Did you find that generally most people were very open to that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't take too much to take a drop of spiritual truth and water and put it on a terribly dry soul and a longing soul. And so you see that spark, that seed in their life begin to sprout a little bit. Church grew.
It's kind of like an example I like to use is like if my wife has prepared a delicious meal and she'll say, "Here, just taste this."
Yeah.
Well, so many of the little interactions we have with people is, "Here, taste this. Here's what the gospel tastes like."
Yep.
And if the person's ready, they're gonna, I like the taste of that.
Yep.
Because it is a feast.
And wow. That's what happened in 1991, September 1st, coming up, an anniversary of that. When the wall came down in Russia and huge cataclysmic political and social changes happening in Russia. And I had spent those years flying along the coast, Nome, Cape Prince of Wales, Teller, Norton Sound, Dillingham, down at King Salmon, and all of those places that I'd flown in that 180. And I had that experience of flying in the wintertime on the West Coast. The wall came down, and we got the vision to open up Russia.
Wow.
And so at the time, my son David was starting a 135 in Glen Allen at Golcana Air Service. And I was helping him get that started because I was an IA, because I was an instructor and I had experience. I helped him get a 135 going up there in Glen Allen. And then we began to realize we could possibly fly to Russia. Loaded Dave's Navajo, went to Russia, and things happened there were incredible. As we presented the word, gave the Bible to many different people. We ended up living there in Russia for 7 years.
Wow.
Coming back, and in 1980, getting Brooks Range Bible Camp going again. So that's how all of that came together.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, are the people over there in Russia, are they very much like Native Alaskans? Or are they like Russian, as we might, the stereotype?
No, they're like Native. Well, it's just like Alaska.
Yeah.
25% of the people are Native. And they're the same Native people as on this side.
Yeah.
Some of them were related.
Yeah.
Even.
Wow.
On the between the Bering Straits.
No, fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so you came back and you're helping with the Brooks Range Bible Camp, and let's pick up from there.
And so there, with Brooks Range Bible Camp, along came Joe Gerwig, and several more from the neighborhood here, because our church at Glacier View is a very missions-minded Alaska ministry, Alaska natives and villages, and his sister Tiffany.
I got to meet her. Yeah, I met Tiffany.
Yeah, she's just a single school teacher, and she is living the life of eating, tasting, sleeping, and carrying on and teaching in the villages of Alaska. Well, all of that, God brought people to help run Brooks Range Bible Camp.
Wow. Well, I want to pick up with Joe. So he mentioned that Joe came along with Brooks Bible Camp, Brooks Range Bible Camp. So tell me about that. How did you get involved with Brooks Range Bible Camp, which ended up becoming Kingdom Air? Like, tell me about how did that come about for you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was grew up at Glacier View Bible Church, like Dwayne said, and I had, as a young boy, I wanted to do all sorts of things. My parents had worked at Victory Bible Camp, and that was what got them where they met, what got them to Alaska. And so growing up there, ministry minded family, ministry minded church. And my parents had known Dwayne since the 80s when he was in Glen Allen before he went to Bettles.
Okay.
And so I grew up hearing these stories about Dwayne. I remember before Glacier View Bible Church at Spring Creek Bible Church, I remember Dwayne coming and sharing these stories from Russia when he was doing stuff in Russia, and guys from the church going on mission trips there. And so I remember these stories, and then I remember hearing the stories Dwayne sharing at prayer time at church and things about Kingdom Air Corp starting, but I didn't know anything about it. And so as I was, I wanted to do all sorts of things, like many young boys, like probably every young boy had a whole list of things I wanted to do, and knew I probably wouldn't do them all, but just occupation things. And I was 15. And when I realized I wanted to learn to fly, like legitimately, this wasn't just one of those many dreams, one of the things off the list, but it was something I actually wanted to do. And at that point, let's see, this would have been 2009, and Kingdom Air Corp had been going for 10 years at that point. And so I'd kind of heard a little bit about it through prayer time at church, but not really didn't know what it was. Didn't know. I had come down here and helped with a few things with a church work group, and that was the extent of my knowledge. And I think it was that year was the first year that my sister Tiffany was involved with Brooks Range Bible Camp. She had attended that. One of our other friends that we were growing up with had been a part of Brooks Range Bible Camp, a couple of them, and talked Tiffany into it. And so, but I knew I wanted to learn to fly. And I had thought a lot about the future, a lot about what I was going to do with my life. But Dwayne sent me down after him and I went flying, and we went and looked for moose. And that was he had told me, "Hey, hit me up at church, and we'll go look for moose." And so then he sits me down in the office and asks, "So you want to learn to fly?" "Yes." "Why?" And I didn't have an answer, and it kind of surprised me. Even at 15 years old, I had thought a lot about occupation, future, work, but I hadn't thought about why I would want to learn to fly.
It was just cool at the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was like, well, it's really practical. We had narrowed down to two places we were going to go moose hunting. We had seen moose in one spot and not the other. So this flight we just did was
exactly where to go.
extremely practical.
Yeah.
And we didn't get a moose, but but to me at that point, it was that question of why. I'm rolling through my mind going, whoa, I don't know. It was really practical. I know it's very useful in Alaska. There's all sorts of, it's not just a hobby, it's an industry. So those reasons were coming to mind. And Dwayne says, well, have you thought about missions? And then I'm thinking, well, mom and dad were missionaries. The church, like it wasn't a foreign concept to me, but it was not something I personally, of all the many things I'd thought about, Joe Gerwig had never thought about becoming a missionary.
So you've been around missions and heard all the stories, but you never put it on yourself. Like, is that for me?
Right.
This was the first time that happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that challenged by Dwayne, and then he said, I want you to pray about whether or not God is calling you into mission aviation. He said, here at Kingdom Air Corp, we train pilots headed into mission aviation. He said, as you pray about it, if you feel God leading you to missions, you can get your training here. He's like, you're 15, you could solo on your 16th birthday. You got to be 16. Like, I've always wanted to solo somebody in 6 planes on their 16th birthday. That's what he said. And so, but he said, as you pray about it, if you feel God opening the doors for you to become a pilot, but not mission aviation, you can get training somewhere else, because that's what we do here.
Yeah.
And I took that very seriously. And I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I remember being just very encouraged deeply through youth group and stuff that winter, and I don't remember any specifics, but I remember taking that extremely seriously, and about throughout that winter praying about, this was in the fall, this conversation with Dwayne, and so praying a lot about that. And at some point in the spring, I throughout the winter, I did feel God opening those doors. And looking back on it, I don't think that God was like, "Yeah, you finally found the one thing I wanted you to do," but it was like, "Yes." I feel like God's answer was, "Yes, that is a way I will let you serve me."
Okay.
And so I did. I soloed not in 6, but in 2 planes. The next spring.
Almost.
Yeah. Dwayne was talking about the 170 and the 182. And
It's like overwhelming for like a 16-year-old.
That's a lot of planes.
yeah. My medical, I got it a few days before I turned 16, and it actually had a restriction on it. The examiner didn't know what to do. He's like, "I can't issue a medical to somebody who's not 16." And I'm like, "Well, I need it by my birthday."
Yeah.
And so it had a restriction on there, not valid until
Oh, okay.
June 11th. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was what got me
Wow.
into aviation in Kingdom Air Corp. And fast forward about a year and a half, because it was another year till I could get my private. And then I got my private a couple weeks after my 17th birthday. Then I went to Brooks Range Bible Camp that year. Flew a Champ that I was part owner of, no electric. We flew as a group, probably 6 or 8 airplanes up. I was the first one to take off, last one to land. So far behind the slowest 150 by the Fairbanks. I couldn't even talk to them on the radio.
Just watch them pass you by.
Yeah. And had a student pilot in the back seat. And so then later on that fall, just Brooks Range Bible Camp was I learned a lot. And to use the airplane in that way was really impactful. But then I started to kind of drift back into a mindset of doing construction in remote Alaska with an airplane, and started to kind of lose my focus. And I wasn't making active steps necessarily, but just mental steps. And I wasn't praying about some decisions that I was making. I'd already graduated high school and things, and it wasn't in the world's eyes, and even in the church's eyes, I wasn't making bad decisions. But the key was I wasn't praying about my decisions, and it took a while for me to realize that, and God broke me of that. And through that, then I just had a greater sense of commitment to, wait a minute, this isn't what God had called me to. This isn't, when Dwayne challenged me to pray about if God was leading me into mission aviation, the answer was yes. And that's not what I'm preparing for in my mind.
You're preparing to be a construction guy using an airplane.
Yeah. And so when I realized that, when God broke me of that, I decided to stop doing construction for my dad. I decided to pursue my instrument and to go to Bible school. And when I left for Bible school, 12 years ago, this week, actually, I went to Frontier School of Bible down in Wyoming. And I knew when I pulled out of my parents' driveway, I was like, that's not home anymore. And I was thinking that I'd probably be in either overseas or Northern Alaska or Russia, something like that. And so fast forward a couple years later, I had met Teresa, who's now my wife there, and she, that's another story. I knew I'm called to mission aviation. I tried to get out of it once. That wasn't accidentally, and not consciously, but that wasn't God's plan. And so I knew I wanted to be married before I was in full-time ministry, but I was not going to pursue a girl who didn't already feel called to missions.
And did she feel called?
No. And
but
so
you liked her a lot.
No, I didn't even let myself, because she wasn't.
But you just didn't let yourself. Okay.
No, God changed her heart.
Okay.
And after God changed her heart, then
you let yourself.
Yeah. Then I pursued her. And so as we were in the last semester of Bible school, we were engaged, planning on getting married 2 weeks later. I signed up for A&P school in Fairbanks for the 12-month program that fall. We were praying together about, okay, God, then what? What will the next step be? Not that we had to know that answer yet, but we were really close to signing up with an organization to go overseas. I had over 500 hours, had my commercial all through Kingdom Air Corp. I did get my instrument while I was at Bible school. I got it through a 141 school, but all my other training and that 500 hours of experience through Canada.
You had all the right qualifications to go overseas or whatever.
So if I talked to an organization, they were all excited and sign here. And I said, no, I need to pray about this. Because in my mind, it was kind of like when I was done with high school, and I made those decisions that I didn't pray about. I was like, I can't do that again.
Mm-hmm.
I need to know what God's decision is here. And Dwayne had told me, I had told him that I'm praying about other options, and he said, well, I'm praying you come back to Kingdom Air Corp. And in my mind at that moment, I was thinking, well, Kingdom Air Corp is training.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trained. I'm ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
But God closed the door on that organization we were about to sign up with, and brought us to Kingdom Air Corp. And it's been so reassuring ever since, knowing that the reason that we're here is because God has us here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we committed to coming here before getting married, before going to 12 months of mechanic school.
Mm-hmm.
But then the day I got done with classes, we moved in here at Kingdom Air Corp.
Wow.
And so now that was 8 years ago this month that we moved here.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's
I just think that's really, I don't mean to interrupt that. I think it's really interesting, your conundrum you felt. And I think you were hinting at it a little bit because you said you signed up for this mission organization to go overseas. And then you end up Kingdom Air Corps. And your thought was, well, they just do training though, and I'm trained.
mm-hmm.
But yet that is where you were put.
Yeah.
And so there's like that battle, like, I should be over there, but I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you struggle with that?
I still do sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes I still think, man, God, I just want to go do what I'm trying to invest in people, training people for them to do. But God has us here. And
does Brooks Range Bible Camp fulfill some of that in you?
Yeah, and when I first got my private when I was 17, I was like, that was a lot of work. I passed that checker out.
I was just the introductory.
Like, right. And I was like, instrument, no way. Definitely never ever instructor. And a few years later, by the time that I had my commercial, I couldn't wait to become an instructor. And it was 3 years later, just there was enough going on in life. It was 3 years later till I got my CFI. But I knew I had a passion for teaching it at that point. And God has given me a lot of experience through Kingdom Air Corp ultimately that I want to be able to pass on. And that's something that now I've slowly, I was one of the main instructors for a few years, and now I'm still an instructor, but not one of the main ones. And I really have a heart to pass on the experience that I have that other CFIs here don't. Like we have volunteer CFIs that come that's what they're here for. They can work with students for the main ratings and things, but I can help them get experience that our CFIs don't have, or so it can kind of fill a niche. But I really know that this is where God has us, teaching people headed into mission aviation, and that assurance of that is sustaining. And the Lord has confirmed that over and over. This is where we are, and being in the director of operations position, that's not something that I take lightly. But to see growing up in a mission-minded church, mission-minded family, growing up doing construction, growing up going to Bible school, great Bible school, learned a ton there in so many ways, including just I was an RA for 2 years and the servant leadership of that and things. And now I can see that the fact that I'm over the mechanics, I love wrenching. Grew up.
Oh wow.
We wrenched on all sorts of stuff. Now I don't end up in the hangar very much. Some in the winter, hardly at all in the summer. I've got my IA. I enjoy.
Oh yeah, so I got the IA conference.
Yeah. And so I enjoy that, but I don't get a chance to do it very much. But the fact that God gave me that experience in the past, and now that I'm in a sense in charge of that over Kingdom Air Corp, like
it's an interesting shift, isn't it? Because you received the training, and now you're dishing it out, and so it's a reversal of roles. And you've come over that hill now. Now you're serving others,
and yet I don't feel like I've got this extreme amount of experience to be, but I feel like the experience that God gave me from the time I was a kid working on bikes, and changing engines with my brother. Like by the time I was 13, I think me and my brother were changing engines in vehicles without my dad. And that's what we grew up doing. Buy another used vehicle off of Craigslist and keep another old one going or whatever. But and that's and all that life experience translates into, like, there's no mistakes. God's story for each person. It all builds. And so to be able to be building into the students here, and even the volunteers, everyone who comes here, our main focus, as Dwayne had challenged me with, pray about whether or not God's leading it into mission aviation. we train people here who are headed into mission aviation. That's still Kingdom Air Corp's
Mhm.
focus.
Mhm.
That's our goal, and our goal is to train people who they have that calling.
Mhm.
That calling, not like when I was not willing to consider any girls who didn't already feel called to missions. That's
Mhm.
it wasn't mission aviation specific, but like here at Kingdom Air Corps, that's our goal, is
Mhm.
to train people who have that call already,
Mhm.
and to invest in them, not just in the aviation, but in that call as well.
Mhm.
But not to just to train the next generation of bush pilots.
Well, I'm sure you've seen over and over again with these students that come through. They all feel called to missions, and they go, "But where do I go? What mission organization?" And I'm walking through these young people through that wrestling match. And, we talked about it this morning.
Yeah.
The name Israel means to wrestle with God, and especially at that pivotal time. All of these young people are wrestling with God. What do you want me to do? What am I? The shoulder shrugging. I don't know what to do. It's a wrestling match with God, and you get to walk through that with them, which I see that in you is something you are passionate about.
Yeah, and it's not. Yeah, there's this summer we've got 15 students. It's the second most we've ever had, and God has grown Kingdom Air Corps to this point. And I wish I remembered back in 2010 when I was working towards solo how many students were here, but I don't. And I don't even know that we got a list written somewhere. Like what the last probably 6-8 years we've got a list somewhere, but and it's not about the numbers, but it's just exciting to see and to think back through these names. That student pilot that was in the back seat in 2011 when I flew that champ to Brooks Range Bible Camp, the years of ministry that he's been involved in, and yeah, and these other people, and not everyone who comes through here ends up in full-time mission aviation, and that's something I've wrestled with too, and I've realized that it's between them and God. And also we don't know, hopefully they're serving actively in their local church. But who knows, maybe it's not their season and they'll use those aviation skills that God has given them later in their life, but that's between them and the Lord. I've realized that I can't, it's not my place to and certainly not hold that against them or anything. But that's our heart, is to really invest in people who have that call.
Yeah.
And mostly on the flight training side, we really encourage our students and even volunteer instructors and stuff to spend time in the hangar, to spend time learning. We're not set up really to do an A&P apprenticeship. Technically we could, but practically we're just not really set up for it. Not at this point.
Maybe one day, but not
maybe
today.
One day, yeah. And it was something that I feel like the Lord has laid it in my heart, is to really excel in our main purpose. And our main purpose is flight training. And there's other places that their main purpose is maintenance training. And so in my mind, like I said, I really feel like the Lord has laid on my heart not dividing focus too much.
Yeah, that's really good.
And so yeah, just being able to do that, but to be able to have our students and volunteers get more experience, more exposure, to be able to do those, to have more experience in the maintenance. So when I went to mechanic school, I had logged 500 hours of maintenance time.
Oh wow.
Which not doing an apprenticeship, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
But that experience made it so I didn't have to study nearly much. Like I had to
yeah. So apprenticeships are a good way to get the A&P.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm curious tell me how the Brooks Range Bible Club integrates with Kingdom Air Corps. How do you use it, and like what is it, and how do you use it here at Kingdom Air?
Yeah. Well, it's really the biggest number one distraction to our flight training.
Speaking of distractions, being focused.
Yeah. It really, it could be seen that way. The reason that I say it's a distraction, so it's a 2-week Bible camp that Kingdom Air Corps puts on in the Brooks Range of Alaska, so the northernmost mountain range. It's where the Brooks Range Bible Camp comes from. And it's an area where the villages that we pick up kids, they don't have much gospel influence, period. The one village, since I've been involved with Brooks Range Bible Camp, there is now a missionary family there. And it's just totally changed those kids.
Hmm.
Partially just Bible knowledge and background. Some of them have accepted the gospel and been able to be discipled. So not all of them is it a necessarily that they're believers walking with the Lord. Some of them are, but just even the basic Bible truths that they understand and know. But so Kingdom Air Corp hosts basically this 2-week Bible camp. We do it on property that belongs to a family that grew up there that Dwayne knew in that period of time when he was in battles in the 80s. And he would do work on their airplanes and stuff. And so there was a number of years when Dwayne was in Russia and the catchers were no longer in that area that there was not.
Are the catchers still around?
Tam still lives in California.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
she
okay.
came my second year involved with Brooks Range Bible Camp. Tam came and spoke for some of the devotional times and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's been here at Kingdom Air Corp more recent as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So there was this spiritual need for those people there.
Yeah.
And Dwayne had started Kingdom Air Corps with the
Mhm.
goal of training up these missionary pilots and wanted hands-on stuff for them to do.
Mhm.
And so Brooks Range Bible Camp started up more as we know it today in 2006.
Okay.
My sister became involved in 2009,
Mhm.
myself in 2011.
Mhm.
There was a couple of years when the summer I got married and the summer I was in Bible school. I wasn't really a part of it, but aside from that, since that first year in 2011, I've been there. When we first had it at Krebs Creek where it now is, um, and started a deepening relationship with the Fickus family there. And my family drove up to Coldfoot. I flew them in a 172 that's now in Russia,
Oh wow.
and uh, started having, or my family helped build the lodge that's there.
Oh wow.
And so starting then, I've had more of an involvement now. My sister, we helped put it on.
Here we go.
And,
All right. So we just had a very funny knock on the door, and it was your grandson.
No, some of our one of our families here with 7 kids.
Okay. We got a knock on the door from a young boy asking for a lollipop.
Yeah.
So we're wonderfully distracted and interrupted.
Carry on.
But all of us with kids understand. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So go ahead, Joe, with about Brooks Range Bible Camp.
Yeah, and so Kingdom Air Corp puts this Bible camp on in this remote location, and for 2 purposes. One is those kids desperately need the gospel,
Mm-hmm.
and putting on this Bible camp is a way to do it. And the second purpose that really I view the purpose as equal in for our sake is the fact that here we have these aspiring missionary pilots that are deep into training, and it is a distraction to the flight training,
Yeah.
but not to the mission training. It's like the culmination of the mission training. Our flight students are the bulk of the staff, so we hardly have any staff that's not people that are here for the whole summer. And we fly these same Cessna 150s, the Champ that I flew up there in 2011. Like, we don't have it anymore, but to fly these training airplanes that are in one sense worthless to mission aviation. We don't pick up kids with them, but we fly them all the way up there and put training on hold for 2 weeks. And our students are the staff of Bible camp.
Wow.
And so it's a chance for them to be a part of mission aviation firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we don't portray it as this is the only method of mission aviation, but we got to fly in the food. We might get some of the upper level students involved in that, potentially in flying the campers, but a lot of that's mostly the flight instructors. And we put on this remote, primitive 2-week Bible camp. 8 to 12-year-olds on week 1, 13 to 19 week 2. And we wrap up stuff. We start kids camp Wednesday morning and go to Sunday morning. And teen camp we go Tuesday morning to Sunday morning. And the reason we end on Sundays is we try to get as many of our flight students, the camp staff, and that might be climbing back in the same 150 that they've been training in here at Kingdom Air Corp all summer, flying to a village and just experience village life for the afternoon.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it's got those 2 purposes. But like I said, it's a huge distraction to our flight training. And I tell our students when they first show up, look, we've got, we're not trying to compete with, there's places you can go that you can get your private pilot's license or commercial a whole lot faster than here. We're not trying to compete with that, but we're trying to have ministry the focus the whole way through, whether that's our daily devotions here at Kingdom Air Corp, or taking 2, which really turns into more like 3 by the time we get back, and we cover weeks off in the middle, just by the time students are starting to solo, and when it's really time to just start zooming forward and wrap up the rating, we put it on pause for almost 3 weeks. But yet it's at the end of the summer, almost every year, it's the highlight of almost all the students.
So, it's interesting because I remember being a student myself. I remember feeling like, man, I'm just tired of being a student. I want to do something.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like that, once they get tired of being a student, they can actually go and like not be a student.
Yeah.
They can fly, and I know they're not flying kids, but they can fly the plane there with, with an instructor or whatever, and feel like they're doing something.
I remember that feeling my first time, specifically the first time I picked up kids. I was running to the 172 to pre-flight. In that flight, I just remember thinking, it was like it was flight number 1. Everything up till now was training, and this is now the first flight of doing what I trained to do. That's the way I felt.
That sense that I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like we were talking about earlier, getting a taste of the gospel. It's like, here is a little taste of missions, and it just stirs that in people.
Yeah.
Right. So have you found that over the years it does that for your students?
Yeah. And we've got, there's a couple that's in the village of Grayling that basically they met here at Kingdom Air Corps, and they felt called to village ministry, Alaska Village Ministry through Brooks Range.
Wow. I know who you're talking about.
And currently they're not using aviation, but they're totally involved in missions.
Yes.
Yep, they didn't want to, and I think it's such a neat and humbling concept. They didn't want to be missionaries that showed up with all the options with an airplane. An airplane might be in their future. They don't feel like their aviation training was a waste or anything, but they just didn't want to have an easy option to get out of the village or whatever. But they do see that an airplane could really be an asset alongside in the future.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept you brought up because I've heard it a lot. People who go through all the training and then they don't use it. And there's a guilt feeling that comes with it. But that's why this morning in devotions I shared about Moses. Like Moses was trained in the Egyptian educational system, and then he was a shepherd for like 40 years. It sounds like a lot of wasted time, but it wasn't. It was through aviation training or Egyptian educational system that the Lord forms our stories and trains us to be who we need to be in our own sanctification. And so, yeah, I know people experience those guilt feelings, but it's an unnecessary burden, I think.
And I think part of the reason that, especially in aviation, it can feel that way is because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
And there's
a lot of donors and stuff like that.
Yep. Yeah, we try to keep it as least expensive as we possibly can for our students to help them stay out of debt to be able to go into missions.
Yep. Yeah, that's a big deal. Okay, so we can kind of wrap it up, but I saw on the wall that Kingdom Air Corps has been around since 1999, and this is your 25th year anniversary. And so what is next? What does the future look like for Kingdom Air Corps looking forward?
Well, the Great Commission tells us to pray, therefore, the Lord of the harvest, that he would send forth reapers into the harvest field. We, in missions, are aware of the need of getting the gospel to a nation, to a world where the population is growing exponentially. And the need of getting the gospel to these people is a very difficult task, especially if we who are sensing the call are needing to go places where we cannot go. Either there's no aviation, or there's no mission aviation, or people from America can't go. And so this is becoming more and more isolated places. So we have been looking for and training people of other nations to be missionary pilots in their homeland where we cannot go. So we're praying that What?
But they can.
But they can.
Right.
So we have proven this concept.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. I keep saying that because you guys are saying interesting things. That the future of missions looks more like people within a nation reaching their own rather than outsiders coming in, which is a new concept in world missions, because the gospel has extended itself to extent where, at least in most places, I'd say, there are people within the nation who are believers who want to reach their own. They just need to be equipped. And this is true in Mexico, where I served for some years. When I left, the Mexican church was really stepping up, and the people in the Mexican church are reaching the people within their own nation. And that's kind of seems like the way things are going in the future. But now we as Americans with resources and airplanes, we have a capacity to train. They can come here and we can't go there, right? And so we can bring them in, train them, and send them back. So that's a very interesting concept. So that's one of the visions for Kingdom Air Corps, you'd say, is that idea. Wow, very interesting. Okay, well, I really enjoyed hearing about Kingdom Air Corps with you guys. I know that each of you have a ton of like flying stories and missional stories. Maybe one day we will be able to get to those. But really appreciate you guys sitting down with me, learning all about Kingdom Air Corps and what you guys do here. It's a beautiful place. It's beautiful to fly in here, and you beautiful people. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Billy.